sit there, and it's just not fair. But if no one else comes, hang there, okay?
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Awesome.
So welcome to those who are joining us on YouTube.
Shabbat shalom to all. Shabbat shalom to our small but mighty community of congregants this morning.
Yes.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thought it would be maybe a little bit fun to begin. For whatever reason, I woke up this morning with the words of, is it Psalm 94? Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha. It just felt so,
Nice.
I felt awake to it. I was thinking about the idea of service, and what it means to serve joyfully, like how it is to serve joyfully, like what opens up our hearts to make our service, even if, like my kids say, I don't want to do it. How can I find joy there anyway, right? So that's what I woke up with. So the words are, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha. Go ahead and find the joy in service. And the joy follows, I guess. So here we go. Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Again, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Na na na, ya na na, ya la la, na na na, na na, na 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 na, na na na, ya na na, na na na, ya na na na. Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, Ivdu et Adonai b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana, lefanav birnana. Yada 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 la la. Yada 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 yada
We're on page 74 as we move into Matovu.
Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Join me. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. Feel free to stay on that. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael. 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 Ba'ani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon. May my prayers ascend to you. May my prayers ascend to you wherever you may dwell. One more time, Matovu. Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael, Yisrael. Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael.
We're on page 76. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed the human being with skill, creating the body's many pathways and openings. It is well known before your throne of glory that if one of them be wrongly opened or closed, it would be impossible to endure and to stand before you. Blessed are you, Adonai, who heals all flesh, working wondrously. Baruch atah Adonai, rofeh kol basar umafli la'asot, page 78.
Amen, amen. Elohai, Elohai, Nishama, Shenatata bi Ehorai. Try it again. Elohai Nishama,
Elohai, Elohai, neshama shenatata bi teorai. אתה ייצרת, אתה נפחת בי, ואתה משמרה בקרבי. אלוהי נשמה, אלוהי, אלוהי נשמה, שנתת בי טהורה היא.
We chant responsively on page 80. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan l'sach b'bina lechin ben yom uben laila.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם פוקח עברים.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, matir asurim.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם זוקף כפופים.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, rokah haaretz al hamayim.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם המכין מצעדי גבר.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, malbish arumim.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם הנותן ליעף כוח.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hama'avir shena me'enai u'tnuma me'afapai.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שעשני בצלם אלוהים.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani ben chorin.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שעשני ישראל.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, ozer Yisrael bigvura.
אמן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם עוטר ישראל בתפארה.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
אמן.
Page 88.
אלו דברים שאין להם שיעור, שאדם אוכל פירותיהם בעולם הזה, והקרן קיימת לו לעולם הבא. ואלו הן, join me, כיבוד אב ואם וגמילות חסדים, והשכמת בית המדרש שחרית וערבית, והכנסת אורחים וביקור חולים, והכנסת כלה ולוויית המת בעיון תפילה, והבאת שלום בין אדם לחברו, ותלמוד תורה לנגד
כולם. We're going to move forward now in our prayer book, Baruch She'amar, page 94.
So I was thinking a lot in this last month in preparation for Rosh Hashanah. For me, how I use my language is always a big one. Like when I speak up, when I don't, right? And the way that I speak, that's a big one in terms of my cheshbon hanefesh, my account taking. And for many years, I put a big space as I chanted Baruch She'amar, a big space between Baruch She'amar and V'haya Olam, because I knew that in that space was this invitation to feel the sacred power of what our words do, because they are our inheritance from the sacred, divine creator of words. Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, blessed is the one who spoke, because through the word is where the real creation began, and through our words is where real healing can begin. So in this last couple of days for Elul, I thought maybe we could do a slightly longer meditation this morning, starting with the words, "Blessed is the one who spoke, and the world came to be. Blessed is God."
Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch hu, that's it. Baruch Shemo, Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch hu, Baruch, you can keep that going. Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch, Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch Osev Reshit, Baruch Omer Ve'oseh, Baruch Ozer Mekayem, Baruch Merachem al haaretz, Baruch Merachem al habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachar Tov le'av, Baruch Chai La'ad V'kayam la'netzach, Baruch Podeh U'Matzil, Baruch hu, Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch hu, Baruch Shemo, Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch ata Adonai melech mahulal batishpacho.
We're on page 96, a special prayer for Shabbat.
מזמור שלי יום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון. Let's try it again. מזמור שלי יום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון. להגיד בבוקר חסידך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי עשור ועלי נעלה היגיון וכינור מזמור שיר יום השבת, טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון ולזמר לשמך עליון.
אשרי יושבי ביתך, עוד יהללוך סלה.
אשריהם שלו, אשריהם שאדוני אלוהיו.
תהילה לדוד, ארוממך אלוהי המלך, ברוך שמך לעולם ועד.
כבוד אדוני הלילה שמך לעולם ועד.
גדול אדוני מול מאוד, ולגדולתו אין חקר.
דור לדור ישבח מעשיך וגבורותיך יגידו.
הדר כבודך ודברי נפלאותיך עשיך.
וזוזנותיך יאמרו וגדולתך אספרנה.
זכר רב טובך יביעו וצדקתך ירננו.
חנון ורחום אדוני ערך אפיים וגדול חסד.
אהוב אדוני לכל ורחמיו על כל מעשיו.
יודוך אדוני כל מעשיך וחסידיך יברכוך.
כבוד מלכותך יאמרו וגבורתך ידברו.
להודיע לבני אדם וכבוד הדר מלכותו.
מלכותך מלכות כל העמים וממשלתך בכל דור ודור.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
הנה כל אליך יסברו ואתה נותן להם את אוכלם בעיתו.
פותח את ידיך ומשביע לכל חי רצון.
צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו וחסיד בכל מעשיו.
קרוב אדוני לכל קוראיו לכל אשר יקראו באמת.
רצון יראיו יעשה, בעת שבתם ישמע ויושיעם.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו, ואת כל הרשעים ישמיד.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פיו, ויברך כל בשר שם קודשו לעולם ועד.
ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם. הללויה.
Psalm 150, page 100.
כל הנשמה תהלל יה, הללויה. כל הנשמה תהלל יה, הללויה. נשמה תהלל יה, הללויה. כל הנשמה תהלל יה, הללויה. הללו, 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 הללויה, הללו. הללו, 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 הללויה, הללו, הללו אל בקודשו, הללו ברכיהו זו, הללו בגבורותיו, הללו כרוב גודלו, הללו, 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 הללויה, 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 הללו, הללו. הללו, הללויה, הללו, הללו בתק השופר, הללו בנבל וכינור, הללו בטוף ומחול, הללו בנימים ועוגב, הללו, 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 הללויה, הללו, 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 הללויה, הללו, הללו. בצלצל שמה, הללו בצלצל תרועה, כל הנשמה תהלל יה, הללו, הללויה, הללו, 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 הללויה, הללו, הללו, הללויה, הללו, הללו,
Move forward in our prayer books now. We're going to join together in the words of Yotzer Or, page 110.
Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Yotzer or uvorech choshech Oseh shalom uvorech et hakol Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu, Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu, Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol. עושה שלום ובורא את הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני יוצר המאורות.
Page 112.
אהבה רבה אהבתנו, אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה ביתרה חמלת עלינו בעבור אבותינו ואימותינו שבטחו בך שבטחו בך שבטחו בך ותלמדם חוקי חיים תן ככוננו תלמדנו המרחם רחם עלינו המרחם רחם עלינו ותן לליבנו להבין להבין ולהשכיל לשמוע ללמוד וללמד לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך ואהבה והאר עינינו בתורתך נדבק ליבנו במצוותיך ויחד לבבינו לאהבה וליראה את שמך ולא נבוש ולא ניכלם ולא ניכשל לעולם העד כי בשם קודשך גדול והנורא פתחנו נגילה ונשמחה נגילה ונשמחה בישועתך והביננו לשלום מארבע כנפות הארץ ותוליכינו כממיות לארצנו כי אל פול ישועות אתה ובנו בחרת וקרבת לשמך הגדול לסלע באמת להודות לך ולייחדך באהבה ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר מעמו ישראל באהבה שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען
תזכרו ויאמר
ויאמר
אדוני
אל משה לאמור דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת והיה לכם לציצית וריתם אותו וזכרתם את כל אדוני ועשיתם אותם ולא תטורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם אשר אתם זונים אחריהם למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים אלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם אמת.
Page 123. The good in us will win over all the wickedness, over all the wrongs we have done. We will look back at the pages of written history and be amazed, and then we will laugh and sing, and the good that is in us, children in their cradles will have won. Our hearts beat with certainty that there is a day and an hour and a mountain called Zion, and that all the suffering will gather there and become song, ringing out into every corner of the earth from end to end, and nation will hear it, and like the caravans of the desert, will all to that morning throng. Page 122.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים לשמך לשפת הים, יחד כולם הודו וימלכו ואמרו אדוני, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. יאידה יאידה יאידה
In a moment, we're going to rise together on the bottom of page 122, and then we're actually going to move into silence through our Amidah. And so you can take a moment to read the words or whatever words are in your heart as we rise together, page 122.
צור ישראל קום בעזרת ישראל ופדחנו ממך יהודה וישראל גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני כל ישראל.
Continue in silence.
יהיו לרצונים רפים רפי והגיון ליבי לפניך יהיו לרצונים רפים רפי והגיון ליבי לפניך אדוני צורי אדוני צורי אדוני צורי וגואלי אדוני צורי אדוני צורי אדוני צורי וגואלי יהיו לרצון עם רפי והגיון ליבי לפניך יהיו לרצון עם רפי והגיון ליבי לפניך.
So Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
I owe everybody a little bit of an apology. Normally I do a little bit on weekends like this where I know we're not going to have a minyan. I do a little bit of rounding up and getting people, but with the proximity of the holidays and the fact that we've had a flooded everything in the congregation, I didn't get a chance to do that. But when we don't have a minyan, I often teach this because this is a kind of an important way of contextualizing the way that we do Torah. So it's customary to avoid things that are called devar shel bi kedusha, things that kind of have a certain kind of holiness, so holy that in the way that we say God's name, even though God's name is all over the place in the prayer book, we avoid saying them if we don't have a minyan. And those are the Baruch Hu and the Reader's Kaddish, which we skipped.
Kedusha.
It's doing the Kedusha. You do the Amidah silently instead of doing it out loud. And you skip Torah reading, right? The only thing that we do here, the rule that we bend is that we say Kaddish because you never know who wants to and needs to say Kaddish. But in the Talmud, Tractate Megillah, there is this kind of implicit debate. It's not explicit, but it's implicit about the point of reading Torah. And there really are actually 2 points to reading Torah. The first point is let's call it the pedagogical point, right? I read Torah because there are important lessons in the Torah of which I want to impart to you. And just like you can study Torah anytime, right? You can crack open a book and you can study Torah. There's a point to reading Torah because you will learn something if we do things right when you walk out of this room, right? The second reason is that Torah is a sacred drama. It is actually a recreation of Sinai, right? If we were in our main sanctuary, we would go up to Sinai, think about the choreography, to go open the ark to go get the Torah. We would then bring the Torah down. The person holding the Torah is Moses, who then parades it among the people, right? Who accept the Torah on themselves. And by the way, there's all kinds of interesting little pieces, like we have jangly things often on the end of our Torah, little bells and things that are supposed to remind us of kind of the lightning and the thunder of of Sinai, right? And then we're supposed to have the Torah conveyed to us as if the person reading it is Moses mediating God's words to us. Well, that piece we lose. We really need a minyan for that, for the sights, the sounds, but we never need a minyan to study, right? In a perfect world, 2 people are studying together, but you can even study on your own. And so it's become our custom to read Torah and to read Haftarah without a blessing, without any of the blessings of taking it out, as a way to kind of pause and get a chance to learn a little something. And so with that, I'm going to take the Torah out. We'll move the table for a moment. And then our clergy associate, Ronnie Pressman, will chant a little piece of our Torah for us all to learn from. And so if you want to grab a piece of paper over there, you can follow along and just give us a moment to reset the room.
Be good if it got to where I wanted it. There it is. No amen.
Yeah.
No amen before this.
Yeah.
Cool. אתם ניצבים היום כולכם לפני אדוני אלוהיכם, ראשיכם שבטיכם, זקניכם ושוטריכם, כל איש ישראל. טפכם נשיכם בגרך אשר בקרב מחנך, מכותב עצך עד שואב מימיך לעברך בברית אדוני אלוהיך ובעלתו אשר אדוני אלוהיך כורת עמך היום למען הקימותך היום לא לעם והוא יהיה לך לאלוהים כאשר דיבר לך וכאשר נשבע לאבותיך לאברהם ליצחק וליעקב.
So now in the presence of our Torah, we think of those who are ill and who are in need of healing, who are in need of a refuah shlema, complete healing of body, mind, soul, and spirit. And so if you've got someone that you're thinking of, someone that you know who is in need of healing, I'll invite you to share their name now with the community. We turn together to page 253.
Feel free to join me.
אבותינו מקור הברכה לאימותינו. May the source of strength who blessed the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mi sheberach aimotenu mikor habracha. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of a body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say
So we're going to move now into our Haftarah. I'm going to put the Torah away briefly as our cantor gets ready to chant.
I'm ready. This is obviously the final, because Rosh Hashanah is on Monday night in 2 days. This is the last of the Haftarot meant to aim our hearts in the right direction. It's, as you'll read if you follow along in the translation or in the Hebrew, it's a lot of intensity and there's a lot of urgency and a lot of threat. And the text seems to be asking us to look at all there is in the world that is dangerous and to ask ourselves, what is our part? What are we contributing to the brokenness? And to let ourselves rest in comfort that this season we will learn, finally, what our individual responsibility is so that we can repair. This is the hope of our ancestors. This is the hope of this text, that it will rattle us, that it will wake us up. From Isaiah chapter 63.
מזה בא מדום, חמוץ בגדים מבצרה, זה ידור בלבושו, צועה ברוב כוחו, אני מדבר בצדקה רב להושיע. מדוע אדום ללבושך ובגדיך כבורך בגת, פורה דרכתי לבדי ומעמים איני שיתי, ואדרכם באפי וארמסם בחמתי, ויעז נצחם על בגדיי וכל מלבושיי אגאלתי. כי יום נקם בליבי ושנת גאולי באה, ואביט ואין עוזר, ואש תומם ואין סומך, ותושע לי זרועי וחמתי, כי שמחתני ואהבו עמים באפי בהשכרם בחמתי, והוריד לארץ נצחם. חסידי אדוני אז הכיר תהילות אדוני קהל, כל אשר גמלנו אדוני, ורב טוב לבית ישראל אשר גמלם, כרחמי עמיו וכרוב חסדיו. ויאמר אחמי המה בנים לו ישקרו, ויהי להם למושיע. בכל צרתם לא צר, ומלאך פניו הושיעם. באהבתו ובחמלתו הוא גאלם, וינתלם וינשאם כל ימי עולם.
בלי ברכות.
All right, so Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
So I mentioned that, there are these two paradigms, the teaching paradigm and the sacred drama paradigm. So now I'm going to do a little bit of teaching in reference to our Torah portion. I actually, it's funny when you read something and it happens to line up to the liturgical calendar. And so I happened to be making my way through a galley copy of Elie Wiesel's new book. It's a book of essays. I'm curious actually how many Elie Wiesel books are going to come out posthumously. I made a.
He's been working in his
Yeah, I made a joke, I think, to Ronnie and Tina, I think you might have been there too, that like, I wonder if Elie Wiesel is going to be the new Tupac, that they just keep coming out with albums over and over again. Or in the Jewish world, it's Soloveitchik. I feel like every few years there's like a new book by Soloveitchik, who has been, dead for decades at this point. But I'm making my way through because I have to write a review about it. And this book happens to be a series of sketches of biblical, rabbinic, and Hasidic personalities that are unpublished. So if you've read any of his books, you probably know that one of his big themes, besides, of course, wrestling with the Holocaust, is writing beautifully 20 pages, 25 pages about people. And so he's got books with sketches of multiple books, actually, of people in the Torah and the rest of the Bible. His sketch on one of his books, I remember on Jacob, kind of transformed the way that I see Jacob. He's written about Talmudic personalities. He's written on Hasidic personalities as well. The only time I've ever seen him speak in person, I had a girlfriend in college who decided for my birthday, which is in September, to do something really, really nice for me. So she brought me to Elie Wiesel lecture because she knew that sophomore me was going to really like it, or junior me was going to really like it. And I was so excited about it. And I sat down ready for him to talk about the Holocaust. And it turned out to be a lecture on Habakkuk, which I never read or heard of in college. Now I would like to know about one of these minor prophets in the Jewish tradition. But that actually was like a piece of his writing. And so in this book, he talks about any number of personalities that he had talked about in these lectures that he used to give, either at BU where he taught, or at the 92nd Street Y, where he would often teach. And in this collection is actually an essay, unpublished, about Eliezer ben Hyrcanos. Now, Eliezer ben Hyrcanos is incredibly important because one of the most important teachings on the Talmud comes in conversation with him. So you've heard me likely tell this story if you've been around for enough times. You probably heard someone else tell this story because it is the most famous story in the Talmud and probably the most used and perhaps abused story in the Talmud by specifically Reform rabbis. We love this story. And when I tell you the story, you'll understand why. So there's a dispute about an oven in the Talmud. It's not sure whether or not the oven is pure or impure. It's not even really important why they're fighting about the oven. It's a really like a kind of fascinating discussion if you care about whether or not, if you take an oven and chop it up into a bunch of different pieces, split those pieces apart and then glue those pieces back together, is it the same oven or a different oven? That's really what they're arguing about, right?
This is also a famous one for lawyers. Lawyers like this.
Lawyers like this story too? Okay.
I like how it's put together.
So what happens is Rabbi Eliezer is sure that he's right, but the rest of the rabbis that he's arguing with tell him he's wrong. So he says, look, if I'm right, see that tree over there? Let it uproot itself and let it plant itself across the field. And so a tree uproots itself and moves and plants itself across the field. And the rabbis look at him and say, that's all fine and good, great, that's a miracle, but you can't tell the kashrut of an oven based on whether a tree moves. And so he says, fine. You know what? See that river that's flowing one way? Let it flow the other way, and I'll prove to you that I'm right. And so the river starts flowing one way and then stops and flows the other way. And the rabbis say, you know what? You can't prove anything about the kashrut of an oven because of a river. And then Eliezer says, you know what? Fine. If I'm right, see the walls of this study hall? Let them fall in on us. And the walls start moving until finally a rabbi starts yelling at the walls and says, butt out. And the walls kind of stay like this in honor of Eliezer and of the rabbis, knowing that if they went up, they might offend somebody, and if they fell down, they might offend someone. And so Eliezer is getting really frustrated, right? He hasn't been able to prove it with the tree. He hasn't been able to prove it with the river. He hasn't been able to prove it with the walls. So he says, fine, if I am right, then let a voice from heaven, let God's self come down and say that I'm right. And suddenly God's voice appears. And God says, Eliezer is correct about the oven. And at that point, Rabbi Joshua stands up. Rabbi Joshua looks at God and he quotes our week's Torah portion. And he says, God, it says in your Torah, lo bashamayim hi. It comes like a few verses after where Ronnie actually stopped reading. Lo bashamayim hi. It says that the Torah that I am giving you is not in heaven. That's what it means literally. It's near and close to you. And so therefore the Torah is ours. And by the way, doesn't it also say in your Torah that you should follow the majority when you make legal decisions? And so because most of us say that the oven is one way, and Eliezer says the oven is the other way, and you don't get a vote because you gave us the Torah already, we are correct. At that point, God disappears. And we find that there's a postscript to the story where Rabbi Natan happens to be walking around and he runs into the prophet Elijah. And he says to Elijah, so tell me, what was God saying on the day when he got kicked out of the study house? And Elijah says, God smiles saying, Nizchuni banai, lizchuni banai. My children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. However, that's not the end of the story. Like, we actually usually stop telling the story there. The story continues in a really horrible way. The rabbis essentially excommunicate Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanos. Now, I'll get back to the question of why they excommunicate him. But he refuses in that moment to accept their point of view, and it leads him to be ostracized from the community. And there's like a really moving section where Rabbi Akiva comes to tell him about the fact that he is excommunicated, and he dresses in all black, and he sits 4 cubits away from him, because when you're excommunicated, no one can come within 4 cubits of you. The cubit is this, from your fingertips to your elbow. And he says, very, very plainly, and eases into it with lots of care and lots of love. And you watch, if you're reading the story in the Talmud, Eliezer ben Hyrcanos' heart just rip open. And by the way, like, the world starts getting set on fire in that moment, right? Like, crops burn. I mean, like, his primal scream is primal in that moment when he realizes what has happened to him. But he begins to hold a grudge. And in fact, he wants to destroy the rabbinic leadership around him. So every day he gets ready to pray for the destruction of the patriarch, right? Of a man whose name is Rabban Gamliel, who signed the decree to basically excommunicate him. And every day, Rabban Gamliel's sister, who happens to be married to Rabbi Eliezer, stops him right before he gets to his prayer to be able to do that. One day, actually, there's a beggar who comes to the door, and Rabban Gamliel happens to be out, right? And the sister goes to help the beggar and misses the chance to stop her brother. And when she gets there, she sees the brother who's fallen on his face, right? Eliezer ben Hyrcanos has fallen on his face, praying now for vengeance. And a cry goes out from the community that Rabban Gamliel is dead. And that's how the story ends. It's tragedy, right? You think, by the way, when you hear the first beginning of the story, that's this beautiful lesson, but it actually molds into like this Shakespearean drama. But I want to pause for a second and ask why he got excommunicated, because I always thought he got excommunicated because he was just a jerk about losing, right? And that's not actually the case, according to Elie Wiesel. And Elie Wiesel says in his essay that he thinks that the reason he got excommunicated is that there are 2 ways to deal with problems, religious problems. There's the human solution and the cosmic solution. And once upon a time, you could actually go to God for the cosmic solution. Once upon a time, you could invoke God. You could look for truth in the universe. You could get God to come down and say, basically, look, you're right. But actually, Eliezer ben Hyrcanos was living in a different era. And at a time where we own the Torah, where it is not in heaven, and at a time where we actually need to stick by rules in order for our society to function, where majority, for example, will win. It's almost irrelevant whether or not you know the truth You have to play the game. And the problem that Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanos had was that he started invoking heaven in a time where actually he needed to look face to face with the people around him. That if he was smart enough, he might be able to convince them of the things that he needed to convince them. Did he try every single possible angle to get these rabbis to agree with him? Did he sit with them in the tension, in the silence? Did he say his piece, go home, let it sink in, try again the next day? That actually we might think that heaven is on our side, and often we do. But we are not prophets just simply speaking the truth. It's our job to move people. It's our job to sway people. It's our job to teach people. And with a world that is so bifurcated, so divided, it almost is irrelevant whether or not truth is on our side. It's irrelevant whether or not we think we are right and others think that they are right and we think that they are wrong. The goal is rather to be patient enough that we just don't give up and not looking for shortcuts in whether or not we're going to win, but to do the hard, impossible work of changing hearts and minds who disagree with us. The tragedy of the story came with Eliezer ben Hyrcanos using God as a crutch. And we can't do the same. Our goal in every dispute is to meet it with patience, to meet it with kindness, to meet it with love, and to meet it with enough intellect that maybe one day we will get there into a place where others will agree. Shabbat Shalom. And so we're going to now turn to Aleinu as we rise, page 282.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים מודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. We move forward 5 pages. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
We turn together to page 294, and I'll invite you, if you're saying Kaddish for someone, to please say their name now as my eyes go around the room.
My grandfather, Herbert Lerner.
Page 294. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad divrach yirtzeh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayachon u'vyom echon u'v'chayed l'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'gala u'vizman karib v'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitnomam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudusha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiram b'yama v'imru amen. Yehei shalom araba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Please be seated. So high holidays around the corner. You probably saw that we set up our tent outside, which is going to be where our youth services are and our second day lunch is going to be. Make sure to sign up for what needs to be signed up for if you can join us. We hope that we'll see you either virtually or in person throughout the course of the holidays. And we've got a host of other things happening as we start the year, especially around Sukkot and Simchat Torah. And so look out for more information on that. And for those who have joined us on YouTube, we know We can't see who you are or how many of you,
But we sense you there.
but Shabbat Shalom to you.
Shabbat Shalom. And I'm wondering, can we pull up that screen from last night, possibly? Our final screen that we had, Bakshu Fanai. So it's okay if we can't, because Psalm 27 we get a couple more days with. And the idea is that we are using it to help guide us toward whatever is true for us. Doubt, fear, hope. Bakshu Fanai, seek my face, the psalmist asks. Seek me, God. And God says, how about you seek me? How about we both do it? This is a call and response. So you don't have to look, but you can if you want. You can look over here. Here we go. Bakshu Fanai, seek my face. Your turn. Bakshu Fanai, seek my face. Seek my face. Et panecha Adonai yavakesh. Et panecha. Et panecha Adonai yavakesh. We try again. Bakshu Fanai, seek my face. Everyone. Bakshu Fanai, seek my face. As I seek Shekhinah in this place, as I seek Shekhinah in this place, Lecha amar libi, to you does my heart speak. Lecha amar libi, to you does my heart speak. To you does my heart cry. To you does my heart cry. To you does my heart sing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. So I'm gonna take the next few moments for myself, set an intention for how I would like to lift up my life this year. Hallelujah is like an affirmation. We have the power to create, to be the creative force as we were meant to be. One more time.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Shabbat Shalom.
And Lashana Tova. Umetuka.